Hello! My name is Jessica, and I am a museum educator at the National Museum of the United States Army. Today, you are joining me for a field trip to learn more about African American soldiers who served in the U.S. Army following the Civil War to just before World War I. I am broadcasting from the National Army Museum, and I will also be sharing information from my colleagues from other Army museums across the country, including the Frontier Army Museum, located at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and the U.S. Army Women's Museum in Fort Gregg Adams, Virginia. Today, we are going to explore the commitment, challenges, and sacrifices of Buffalo soldiers. The time period that we will be covering today is long, 1866 to 1916, so we won't be going in-depth to the specific battles and campaigns that were fought by the Buffalo soldiers. Instead, we are going to look more broadly at the Buffalo soldiers and focus on a few specific soldiers and artifacts and archival material associated with them. Hopefully, this will pique your interest in the topic and demonstrate the sacrifices, challenges, and commitments made by these soldiers. Let's get started with a short artifact exploration. Take a look at this artifact on your screen. This artifact is currently in the collection of the Frontier Army Museum. What do you think this artifact is? What do you notice about the material it is made out of? What might it have been used for? And who do you think would have worn this? While you're looking at the artifact, you might notice that it looks like a coat. The material appears to be animal hide, perhaps buffalo. Just like we use a coat today, this probably would have been used to keep soldiers warm and protected from the elements when they were outside. All of these observations are correct, as this is a buffalo hide coat that was worn by a soldier of the 25th Infantry Regiment. This regiment was part of the 4 all-black regiments that would come to be known as the Buffalo Soldiers. The coat is different from what we think of when we think of Army uniforms today. It was designed when the Army was experimenting with ways to keep soldiers stationed on the western frontier warm in the winter. Different types of animal skins, like buffalo hides, were incorporated to keep soldiers warm in remote posts. The uniform is tied to the nickname of the Buffalo Soldiers. No one is certain where the nickname came from. Some believe that Native Americans coined the term Buffalo Soldiers because of the soldiers' dark curly hair that resembled a buffalo's mane, the uniforms they wore, or because the soldiers fought like fierce Great Plains buffalo. However, one thing is certain. Soldiers themselves embraced the name and considered it to be a sign of respect. You can see the importance of the nickname when you look at the insignia from World War II's 92nd Infantry Division. The buffalo is featured prominently to harken back to the Buffalo Soldiers' legacy decades earlier. Black soldiers have served proudly and courageously in every conflict since the Revolutionary War. Black soldiers fought in the American Revolution and the War of 1812. However, following those conflicts, state and federal laws were put in place to prohibit black military service. It wasn't until the Civil War that Black Americans served the Army in an official capacity again. With the establishment of the United States Colored Troops, or the USCT, numerous free men and formerly enslaved rallied to support the Union cause through military service. Over 175,000 joined the USCT. Their service was critical to the Army, accounting for 1/10 of all Union troops by the war's end. Following the war, the USCT's exemplary service led to a Congressional Act that officially brought black soldiers into the ranks of the Army. On July 28, 1866, Congress approved an act to increase and fix the military peace establishment of the United States. The legislation added new cavalry and infantry regiments to be composed of colored men. Those regiments became the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry Divisions. These regiments were comprised of black enlisted soldiers. However, they were supervised by white officers. The soldiers were posted at Army forts west of the Mississippi River on the frontier in areas that were sparsely populated. The establishment of these all-black regiments coincided with the beginning of Reconstruction in the American South. And, like much of the Army's history, black soldiers' experience paralleled racial attitudes within the country. The establishment of these regiments signaled the promise of inclusion and equity that existed following the Civil War. However, these units found themselves stationed west of the Mississippi River due to racial attitudes held by many Americans of seeing armed black soldiers in or near their community. On the frontier, black soldiers benefited from little or no Jim Crow laws, which created disparities between white and black citizens at home. Soldiers built roads, guarded stagecoaches and mail routes, protected settlers moving westward, acted as park rangers in some of the first national parks, and fought in the Indian Wars to defend American westward expansion. The Buffalo Soldiers enlisted for a variety of reasons that depended on the individuals. Some were veterans of the Civil War, while others were looking for economic opportunity or a sense of adventure. For example, Private Charles Creek's experience gives you an idea of why some soldiers enlisted. He wrote that he joined the Army because I got tired of looking mules in the face, sunrise to sunset. Many seized this opportunity to enlist as a way to advance their own civil rights. Even though they were operating within a system that accommodated racist attitudes held by many in the country at the time, Black Americans believed that military service might lead to equal rights at home. That sentiment is expressed in a quote by White Army Chaplain George M. Mullins of the 25th Infantry Regiment, who wrote, "The ambition to be all that soldiers should be is not confined to a few of these sons. They are possessed of the notion that the colored people of the whole country are more or less affected by their conduct in the Army." The Buffalo Soldiers performed myriad duties on the frontier aligned with the U.S. Army's mission. Primarily, they enforced American Indian and expansion policy. As you can see on this map, the Buffalo Soldiers were stationed at posts west of the Mississippi River and in particular in the south and west. Do you notice anything about the locations on the map? If you are familiar with the Army today, many of these locations are Army posts that still exist. If you are familiar with the National Park Service, some of these locations are national parks today. Places like Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks were originally staffed by Buffalo Soldiers. They prevented wildlife poaching, fought wildfires, halted illegal grazing of livestock, and stopped the theft of timber and other natural objects. They also built roads, trails, and other infrastructure. Let's take a look at one group of soldiers in particular, the 10th Cavalry. Before we get started, do any of you know the difference between a cavalry unit and an infantry unit? Infantry are essentially foot soldiers. They fight on foot, whereas cavalry soldiers are mounted, which means they are mounted on some type of animal, usually a horse. Now that we're on the same page, let's learn more about the 10th Cavalry, who were stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. To do that, we are going to hear more from my colleague Megan Hunter at the Frontier Army Museum.
The 10th Cavalry was formed here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in 1866 as an all-African American regiment. The 10th U.S. Cavalry Regiment was composed of black enlisted men and white officers, which was very typical for the time. Life at Leavenworth was not very pleasant for the 10th Cavalry. The fort's commander, who was openly opposed to African Americans serving in the regular army, made life for the new troops very difficult. Colonel Benjamin Grierson sought to have the regiment transferred and eventually received orders to move the regiment to Fort Riley, Kansas.
After watching that video and learning about how the 10th was raised or formed, what were some of the challenges that the soldiers faced? Now that we have more background about the regiment, let's go back to Megan, who will tell us more about the engagements the unit took part in and show us some of the equipment they used.
Here on display at the Frontier Army Museum, we have a model 1884 Springfield carbine. Manufactured at the Springfield Armory, this is a breech-loading rifle that utilizes a 45-70 cartridge. 45 is the diameter of the bullet, and 70 is the weight of the black powder grain. This weapon was utilized during the Indian Wars, Spanish-American War, and the Philippine-American War. A carbine is slightly smaller than an infantry rifle to allow easier control while on horseback. If you look closely at the butt of the weapon, you can see a small indentation located right here. This is actually the number 10, and it indicates that this was utilized by the 10th Cavalry. From 1866 to the early 1890s, the 10th Cavalry Regiment served at a variety of posts in the southwestern United States. They participated in most of the military campaigns in these areas and earned a distinguished record. 13 enlisted men and 6 officers from the Buffalo Soldiers earned the Medal of Honor during the Indian Wars.
Megan mentioned the 10th took part in the Indian Wars throughout the American Southwest. We got to look closely at the Springfield carbine and saw how the carbine was personalized by the soldier who used it. What did he engrave into the butt of the rifle? The number 10. What do you think this signifies? Right. It signifies pride and confidence in their regiment and their abilities. We also learned that it wasn't just bravado. The 10th excelled at achieving their mission. 18 of them earned the Medal of Honor. This award is bestowed sparingly on soldiers for the bravest of the brave for valor in combat. The majority of a soldier's time isn't actually spent in combat. We will go back to Megan to learn more about what other activities occupied the soldier's time.
During the Indian Wars, not all missions for the 10th Cavalry were combative. The 10th also had missions that included protecting mail carriages and travel routes, controlling Indian movements, providing protection from Mexican revolutionaries and outlaws, and gaining knowledge of the area's terrain. The regiment proved very successful in completing their mission. The 10th Cavalry scouted 34,420 miles of uncharted terrain, opened more than 300 miles of new roads, and laid over 200 miles of telegraph lines.
As Megan mentioned, much of the Buffalo Soldiers' time was spent on other duties, protecting settlers and helping settle the West. While we just looked specifically at the 10th Cavalry, their mission was similar to other Buffalo Soldiers regiments stationed throughout the West. That mission was to carry out the country's Indian policy and protect American interests in the West. To understand more about the experience of Buffalo Soldiers, let's look at an individual soldier. To do this, we are going to use information from my colleagues at the U.S. Army Women's Museum. Cathay Williams is the only recorded female Buffalo soldier. She served in the 24th Infantry Regiment. The story of Cathay Williams symbolizes the resourcefulness and bravery of women, as well as the service of Buffalo soldiers. Williams was born to an enslaved mother and free father in Independence, Missouri. As a child, she worked as a house slave on the Johnson Plantation in Missouri. In 1861, Union forces occupied Jefferson City during the early stages of the Civil War. At this time, captured slaves were officially designated as contraband and served in military support roles such as cooks, laundresses, or nurses. Before her voluntary enlistment, at just 17 years old, Williams served as an army cook and a washerwoman. In this role, she accompanied the infantry all over the country. Williams served under the service of General Philip Sheridan and witnessed the Red River Campaign and the Battle of Pea Ridge. She enlisted for a 3-year engagement, passing herself off as a man. She joined the 38th United States Colored Infantry, which would be consolidated into the 24th. She served courageously on the Great Plains for 2 years. However, she contracted smallpox, was discovered to be a woman, and was discharged. We can learn even more about Cathay Williams from the documents she left behind. Let's take a closer look at her pension record, which is also displayed at the Women's Museum. These types of records can help us learn more about Williams and help put a face to the name. Take a closer look at this record. This small part of her larger pension request reveals a lot of information about her. As you look at the record, I'll highlight some things to note. For example, you might notice that all the he statements have been changed to she, her in recognition of her being found out as a woman. You can also learn that she enlisted in 1866 and was honorably discharged in 1868, having served for about 2 years. She was discharged in New Mexico, and at the time of this request was living in Trinidad, New Mexico, demonstrating that the Army helped determine where she would live. You may also have noticed that she was deaf and belonged to Company A of the 38th Regiment, which would be consolidated into the 24th. After she was discharged, we know she was hired to work at one of the forts. Ultimately, Cathay's pension request was denied, although there had been a precedent for granting pensions to women. Her entire pension record is available digitally on the National Archives if you are interested in reading more. Her service adds an unexpected aspect to that of the Buffalo Soldiers and also shows us how women have served the Army. Not only did Buffalo Soldiers serve on the American frontier, they also served overseas when America declared war on Spain in 1898. During that conflict, elements of the Buffalo Soldiers were deployed to Cuba and eventually the Philippines. Let's do another artifact analysis. Let's start by looking at an artifact on your screen. This time, the artifact is from the National Army Museum. For those of you familiar with the museum, it is on display in the museum's Nation Overseas Gallery. What do you notice about this object? What does it look like? Do you notice anything different about it compared to the buffalo hide coat we looked at earlier? From a basic observation, you can see that this is a coat. You can see that it looks like it was made out of some sort of textured fabric, possibly wool, and that it looks different from the buffalo hide coat we looked at earlier. This is a sack coat that was worn by First Sergeant Miriam Howard Ellis during the Spanish-American War. A sack coat was a standard issue to every U.S. Army soldier during the late Indian Wars and Spanish-American War. However, like the buffalo hide coat years earlier, keeping soldiers warm was important to the Army. While the jacket looks tapered or tight-fitting, this jacket was meant to fit loosely so that soldiers could layer up in the cold or remove underlayers in the warmer weather. That made this jacket appropriate for many locations. You may also be able to tell that this was worn by a sergeant based on the chevrons on his arms. The Buffalo Soldiers left the West as heroes. In fact, some soldiers recalled cheering crowds meeting their trains as they traveled east across the country to Tampa, Florida. However, once they crossed into the South, where Jim Crow laws institutionalized segregation, the Buffalo Soldiers were met with racism and discrimination. After marshaling in Florida, the Buffalo Soldiers soon found themselves fighting side by side with Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders in Cuba. The Rough Riders and Theodore Roosevelt's success in the Spanish-American War have received much attention from historians and popular memory. However, their success came as a direct result of the Buffalo Soldiers, who rescued the unit and allowed them to take San Juan and Kettle Hill. At Las Guasimas, Roosevelt's Rough Riders found themselves surrounded by Spanish riflemen who quickly pinned down the entire unit. The 10th Cavalry was sent in to attack the flank of the Spanish defensives. To make a long story short, they rescued the Rough Riders from impending doom, and together, the 10th and the Rough Riders captured San Juan and Kettle Hills. For their service and bravery in this battle, 5 Buffalo soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor for valor. Future Secretary of the Navy summed up the actions of the Buffalo Soldiers in this short quote, "I must say, I have never seen braver men anywhere." After Cuba, the Buffalo Soldier regiments deployed to the Philippines to take part in the Philippine insurrection. The 24th and 25th were among the first American units to arrive overseas. They immediately entered battle with the equipment and supplies they retained from Cuba. There they stood, seizing major strongholds in the sweltering heat and dense landscape to aid the Philippine effort. After the formal end of the conflict, the regiments were honored for their service in the Philippines, including Edward L. Baker, who would be awarded the Medal of Honor. Following the conflict, the 9th, 10th, 24th, and 25th regiments continued to serve at a series of Army posts in the United States, Hawaii, and the Philippines. For example, elements of the 9th were stationed at the Presidio in San Francisco, California, where they had the special honor of serving as Theodore Roosevelt's presidential escort during his 2-day visit to the city. They were also stationed on the Mexican border and participated in General Pershing's hunt for Pancho Villa during the Mexican expedition. Thank you for taking part in the field trip today. I hope this quick overview allowed you to recognize the commitment and challenges experienced by the Buffalo Soldiers. The decades of service by the Buffalo Soldiers brought with it a reputation and a record of meritorious service that could not be ignored by the United States and the Army. They earned respect with their actions and service, paving the way for future generations of African American service in the Army. Today, the Army has preserved the heritage of the 9th Cavalry Regiment within the 1st Cavalry Division, the 10th within the 4th Infantry Division, and the 24th within the 25th Infantry Division. For more information, please visit our website.